Great. Okay, so there's 18 people in, and I think that's almost our number of registrations. So welcome, everyone. This is a Primrose Hill Community Association event. It's part of our A View from the Hill series that we set up in September. So my name's Tim Kirkpatrick, and I help to run the events at the community centre. I'm also, I started off my career as a psychiatric social worker, and yeah, I've continued to maintain an interest in mental health. I'm actually married to a psychiatrist, so yeah, you know, it's in the family. Martin, do you want to say hello?
Hello, I'm Martin Fisher, and I'm a psychotherapist in private practice in Primrose Hill. And I began my career as a social worker, community-based social worker.
Right, so yes, well, of course, you know, these are challenging times that we're in, stressful indeed, if not traumatizing. So we thought it would be a good time to have this conversation, and yeah, I'm keen for the community association to continue to address mental health, to support mental health. Just apologies this evening for any jargon that crops up. I'm afraid there is a bit of jargon in the field. We'll try and explain it as we go along, but if there are terms that you don't understand, please do just put them in the chat, and we'll come back to them at the end. So Martin, do you want the good news first or the bad news?
Oh, the good news, since we're talking about resilience.
Yes, indeed. Okay, so well, that is the good news. The good news is that human beings as a species are remarkably resilient. And of course, you know, we wouldn't have got to where we are now if it were not for human resilience. So one of the phrases in the field is that we are wired to survive, which is great. I mean, some of that wiring to survive can create difficulties for us, as we'll go on to clarify. But yeah, we're wired to survive. And another part of the good news, which is actually something we've only recently discovered, is that our brains are neuroplastic. So that's something that means basically that we can rewire our brains. You know, we used to think that actually, you know, once we reach adulthood, that was it, game over. Linda Graham, who is one of the writers around resilience, says neuroplasticity is without question the most exciting discovery of modern neuroscience. And the other bit of good news is that there is the phenomenon of post-traumatic growth. So actually, if we're challenged and we find our way through, then actually we become a more substantial person and a more substantial community. And Martin, there's that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross quote that maybe you could share.
There is. The post-traumatic growth is a modern term for something which has been around since ancient Greece and figures in every major religion. This is a quote from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who is most famous for her work with people who were terminally ill. Her work was later adapted for dealing with bereavement. But this is a beautiful quote. The most beautiful people we have known are those who have known defeat, known suffering, known struggle, known loss, and have found their way out of the depths. These persons have an appreciation, a sensitivity, and an understanding of life that fills them with compassion, gentleness, and a deep, loving concern. Beautiful people do not just happen.
Thank you. Yes. So yeah, that kind of speaks of the journey through the fire, you know, which maybe as a community we're all going through the fire at the moment in some way or another. Okay, just to say, so we're going to be talking about stress, trauma, and resilience. We're going to kind of try and give about 10 minutes to each of those. We're hoping there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers at the end. Rather, please just put your questions and comments in the chat rather than in the Q&A. I don't know if you know, on these webinars, you've got both options. But if we could just stick it all in the chat, then that'll make Steve's life easier. Just to say, we are recording the session, which I hope is okay with people. As you probably know, on a webinar, we don't get to see the attendance anyway. Yeah, we hope to finish. We're going to plan to finish by 8:15. And just to say, this is a free event, but donations to the Community Association would be gratefully received. And Steve will put that link in the chat. We've also put together a resources page with some of our favorite authors and some other useful web links, including a resilience questionnaire. So that'll be in the chat. It's also, you can find, there's a link on the web page. Okay, so Martin, we're a couple of local therapists. We both like wearing waistcoats, which, as my wife says, cover a multitude of sins. Yes. We've taken a few walks together in the park and been chatting about our work and how we approach our work. Yeah, we've learned a bit as well about each other's personal histories. And yeah, both of us have experienced some mental health challenges ourselves. And these have kind of led us to where we are now. You know, you're a psychotherapist, I'm a body somatic therapist. So in a way, we're kind of coming from different directions, but we've kind of met, haven't we, in the neuroscience, and particularly in the jargon alert autonomic nervous system. So that phrase, the autonomic nervous system, will come up a few times this evening, but it really is the key to understanding stress and trauma and indeed resilience. Okay, so let's get into a bit of talk about stress then. So yeah, I mean, I don't think I probably have to tell people what stress is. You know, stress is ubiquitous probably in this modern day and age. Yeah, all the way from the financial to the existential. Of course, you know, stress, it's inevitable, but actually it's also necessary, you know, because stress spurs us to evolve and develop, both as individuals and communities. But yeah, when stress becomes anxiety, particularly if it becomes chronic anxiety, then it's going to start to have serious consequences for our mental health, but also for our physical health. One of the things that we've really started to understand, again, relatively recently, is how the autonomic nervous system impacts our health in terms of chronic illness, chronic pain, autoimmune diseases, you know, type 2 diabetes. It's got a big tie-in with cortisol, which is the stress hormone, and inflammation. Yeah. So yeah, stress is a big issue for us all. But yeah, some stresses are easier to deal with than others, and yeah, maybe the stresses that arise in our intimate relationships are often the hardest. And yeah, that speaks to something that Martin, you and I have talked about on our walks around John Bowlby and attachment. Yeah.
John Bowlby and attachment theory. John Bowlby's somebody that very few people have heard of, but is probably more important to the practice of psychology, the applied psychology, what I do and what you do, than is Freud. And and he's a local boy. He lived in, he sort of worked around these parts in child guidance and with what was then called maladapted children, maladapted boys, around Wembley. He trained at the Tavistock Clinic up the road, and at UCL he trained in psychiatry down the road. Attachment theory is, whereas Freud said we were driven by two urges, one was sex and the other was aggression, John Bowlby came along and said, no, that's not right. We're driven by the need to attach, an innate, inborn need to stick to and form a close emotional bond with our caregiver, who is going to protect us and feed us. We can't survive when we're born without the care, attention of somebody to look after us. And that drive for survival is pure Darwinian theory, is the basis of attachment theory.
But then it kind of creates templates for our later relationship, yeah?
That's right. So we can grow up, that experience in our early years gives us an attachment style. And about 2/3 of us are securely attached. We felt confident in our relationship with our parents. They were always there and they understood our needs, particularly our mothers. Those crucial first years, first months, in fact, first 18 months or so are crucial to this process. And so we grow up securely attached, and it doesn't matter where you go in the world, about 2/3 of the world are securely attached, but a very substantial minority, 1/3, are insecurely attached. They fall into two camps. On the one hand, we have those who are avoidant. They have an insecure, avoidant style of attachment, and they tend to be very self-sufficient, proudly self-sufficient. And on the other side, you have people who are insecure, anxious, or otherwise known as ambivalent, and they do attach as adults in adult relationships, but they do so with anxiety. They are nervous about it. They are nervous about the security of those attachments.
So yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that that's that 30, 60%, 30, 70% is so universal as well.
It is.
Yeah. And then one of the other things we've talked about in our wanderings is this moment in 1993 when we started putting people into an MRI scanner, and some of this theory started to actually kind of show up on screen, so to speak. Yeah.
That's right. So it's quite surprising that what we now take for granted in MRI scans, we hear about them all the time, and brain scans are in fact a very recent development. 1993 or thereabouts was the first one, and what we now can do is see how the brain responds in real time to real stresses, and that has confirmed that the way the brain develops is different according to life's experiences. And also that there's a great deal of activity happening even when we don't know it. So that's a kind of lends evidence to the idea of an unconscious.
Okay, all right, yeah. So, yeah, some of Freud's theories were correct then. Yeah. Yeah. And it's not to say, of course, that the sex and aggression drives are not significant, but maybe just not the whole story.
They're still there.
But yes, then of course, something else that we've started to see and when we've been scanning brains is the impact of extreme stress or trauma on brains, and how there are particular bits of the brain that are kind of lighting up when individuals are placed under extreme stress or have been placed under extreme stress. Yes,
that's right. That brain development is affected by trauma as well, and in childhood by a number of what's called sorry about the jargon, but we're adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs for short.
So maybe just because we're kind of moving into the territory of trauma now. So maybe just a bit of emotional housekeeping, perhaps. I think it's usually a good idea when we start to move into this area, just to say, that trauma itself can, of course, be a triggering word. So just please, if people who are watching do kind of find themselves at all triggered in this conversation, probably best just to kind of turn off the screen and do some self-care. Maybe use that exhalation, long exhalation breath. Yeah. If there's someone around who you feel safe around, yeah, maybe just seek them out, make a bit of eye contact with them. Eye contact with someone that we feel safe with is a very effective way of bringing us back into balance. Actually, you get a little burst of oxytocin, actually, which is the attachment hormone.
Also known as the love hormone.
Of course, yeah. Okay, so that was our little health warning. Yeah, and I'm sure there are probably people watching here who know very well what trauma is. But yeah, a very kind of simple definition of trauma is anything that overwhelms our capacity to cope. And Martin, you've got a nice short little phrase: fear without escape. Yeah.
That's how I describe it to my clients. It involves two elements: fear and escape. Fear without escape will deliver a sense of trauma.
And yeah, it's one of the things again that we've seen under the scans is that older bits of the brain start to predominate when we end up in this state of fear without escape. So we actually kind of evolutionarily we kind of go backwards in time. Yeah. So we these are it's important to remember that these are protective responses. They're adaptations to threat. So in a way they can serve us. But of course the problem for us is that we actually can get stuck in some of these old adaptive responses. And there's a phrase in this field around what's called neural cement, which I rather like. So yeah, traumatized brains kind of get stuck in neural cement.
Yeah. Flexible thinking is the opposite of that, and that's a healthy way of being. And when we get stuck, but often I describe it to my clients as we have sort of tram lines, and our moods fluctuate, and we regulate ourselves from highs and lows, but usually within the tram lines. But with trauma, we go outside the tram lines, and sometimes that we can get stuck there. And that's the neural cement. You get stuck in either hyperactivation, where you're hypervigilant, always scanning the horizon for threats, or hypovigilant, if you like, where your mood is very low and depressed.
Yes, and I guess that's what we call the. I get the tram lines in. I call that the window of tolerance. Yeah. Yes. So yes, there are feelings, there are stresses that we can tolerate, and as you say, then we can kind of modulate, we can regulate, we can respond to stress, and then relax when we have the opportunity. But yes, if our resources are exhausted, if our kind of repertoire of responses is exhausted, yes, then we can end up outside that window of tolerance, and then those are the trauma states that we can find ourselves in. And there's a particular bit of the brain, isn't there? You've got a pet name for her. Who introduced
the amygdala, which I call Amy, and I try and make Amy your best friend. That's what I talk to my clients about. So. So you mentioned the evolutionary brain, and the back of the brain is the oldest part, sometimes known as the reptilian brain. Then there's the middle brain, which is the limbic system, otherwise known as the mammalian brain for mammals. And then at the front, we've got the particularly human parts, the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking part. So the middle part is the feeling bit, the limbic system. That's where our emotions live, and that's where Amy lives, Amy the amygdala, and she's scanning the horizon for threats at all times. And when she sees one, when she spots one, real or imagined, she pulls one of 5 levers in this order. The first one is flight. Nobody wants to get hurt, so we'll run away from danger. The next one is fight. If you can't run away, then fight. Stand your ground and fight. But if your adversary is a great big bear, you're unlikely to win that one. So the next one is to freeze, which is sometimes known as playing dead or playing possum, which is a perfectly good survival strategy used by many animals, including the Australian possum. If none of those are going to work, your last one is to faint or flop or fold. Other words are used for this. But basically, you become unconscious because you're about to get eaten and you don't really want to be a witness to it or feel it. So you go numb and you become unconscious, which is also, by the way, a survival strategy, because in some cases, some animals will lose interest in you at that point and walk away. You might just be able to wake up and run again. And the 5th lever that Amy has at her disposal is to befriend. And that's now understood or known as the Stockholm Syndrome, where we make friends with our enemies so they won't hurt us. And in the Stockholm Syndrome, famously, kidnap victims fell in love with their captors.
There we go. Yes, Amy and her 5 levers. Yeah.
And they're very useful because if something is happening to you, you can interpret them. It's quite easy to say, well, am I trying to run away from this? Or am I going to fight? Do I feel aggressive? Or am I freezing? Do I feel stuck in the headlights like a rabbit? So you can interpret your internal weather system.
But again, yeah, all within the context of knowing that these are old, adaptive, protective responses that humans have got them, but mammals have got them as well, haven't they? And as you say, well, some of them are reptilian as well, aren't they? It's once you've kind of started to study some of this stuff, you start to realize just how much of us is kind of zoological. Yeah. Yeah, I often feel when I'm doing my work with clients, working directly on the nervous system. Sometimes I just very much aware that I'm sort of working with a mammal rather than a human being. I mean, of course, we are mammals. But yes, one of the things that all those kind of responses. The same thing happening here is that the prefrontal cortex, that bit that you said is the sort of the human, also human aspect of us. I don't know. There's a bit here called the median prefrontal cortex, which I've heard described as the mohawk of consciousness, which I think is rather nice for us in Camden. When we're used to the punks with their mohawks. So, but yeah, particular bits of the brain. So the mohawk of consciousness. Anyway, so yes, when Amy's pulling her levers, that is offline. Yeah.
Yeah. She does that. Those when she pulls a lever, the response happens in 600ths of a second. It's very, very fast. She commandeers your entire system in the service of survival.
So did you say
600ths of a second?
Okay. So yeah. So So we talk. I've heard talk about amygdala hijack. So yeah, that makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And just how quick that is. Yes.
And that's faster than your thinking speed, which is about half of that.
Yeah. And yeah, I guess maybe people can kind of recognize that how sometimes our kind of experience of being in the world can just change so quickly if we're triggered by something, even something kind of at the edge of our awareness. Yeah.
And it's where phrases like "I was speechless" and "I couldn't think" come from, because literally that process, the thinking brain part, is taken offline as Amy commandeers the rest of the system.
Okay. Yeah. And that the amygdala is obviously kind of it's what it's looking for, the threat that it's looking for, and its kind of its patterning is probably set up fairly early on in our lives. Yeah, would you say? So some people will experience some things as threatening that others don't, simply because of their history.
Yes, and so moving into the territory of resilience here, the ability to withstand stress varies according to early experiences. It's not a single sort of quotient, as it were. It's different for everybody depending on their childhood experience.
So yeah, well, we'll come back. I just wanted to. So I mean, again, trauma is this big word, but it might just be worth kind of acknowledging that there are, there's the trauma comes in different forms, and there's trauma with a big T and trauma with a small t. What's the difference between them?
So big T or capital T trauma is what perhaps we best understand as what was originally understood as trauma or post-traumatic stress, as shell shock, single event, like an accident, like a car accident, for example, or being involved in some terrible event like hijack. That's capital T trauma. The more insidious and difficult one to treat is small t trauma, which is developmental trauma, also known as childhood trauma or complex trauma. And it's a sort of drip, drip, drip effect over time. The bucket still fills up just the same, but it happens slowly. It's chronic, it happens over a period of time.
Yeah, and I suppose it's I know there's a certain amount of politics in around having that the developmental trauma kind of recognized as a sort of diagnostic category, isn't there?
There is, and there's another local boy, Peter Fonagy, who's the head of the Anna Freud Center, was at Swiss Cottage, is now at Angel. That's one of his campaigns, is to get what he calls, I think, developmental trauma, I think is the phrase that he uses, recognized officially by the authorities that be the American Psychological Association, who write the Bible of psychological illnesses.
Well, yes, whether or not it's in the diagnostic manuals, it's out there, and we I'm sure you see it. I know I do. Okay, so I think one of the interesting things for me again around in this the area of trauma is how kind of visceral this experience is. Trauma is we may well experience it in terms of mental processes and fear and anxiety and states of alarm and even states of depression. There's a strong kind of relationship between a difficult history and mood disorders, substance misuse. Increasingly, we seem to understand that most people who with a substance misuse problem have got a there's some trauma in their history. Self-harm. But again, kind of chronic pain as well is interestingly got a kind of, maybe there's a sort of trauma link in there. But some of the kind of best known books in this field have got titles like "The Body Bears the Burden." That's Alan Shaw's book. "The Body Remembers" by Babette Rothschild. The Body Knows the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. I've got a copy of that here. Which is a kind of bit of a Bible for a lot of folk. So this kind of emphasis on the body, and again, and I think that's quite a surprise to people.
It is. It leaves trauma leaves an imprint on your body. It's to do with the way that it's stored in your memory. It's stored in a physical, sensory, motor memory.
Yeah, or what I've heard described as implicit memory. So, explicit memories are ones that, we can kind of call up on if we wish to and sort of put them away again. But implicit memory is kind of, it's there in the tissues, it's there in the musculature. One of the things that happens to any kind of biology, any kind of organism, if you put it under enough stress, it'll go into contraction, as a kind of response. And once it's gone into contraction, which is a bit like that kind of the possum state, but there's another aspect to it which you also mentioned, which is the kind of the dissociating, which dissociation is very interesting, isn't it? Because it's brought about through endorphins, so actually it's often kind of pleasant, isn't it? Or it can be a kind of floaty feeling.
It can be a very floaty feeling. It's also a protective mechanism.
Yeah.
We do it all the time. It's actually dissociation is a natural mechanism. So it's what enables me to concentrate on you, even though I can hear activity going on over there. I don't pay attention to it. So it's a natural process, but it gets, again, the word commandeered, it gets commandeered in trauma.
Yes, but it can be, it can be really, can be can really disable people's lives, kind of dissociation, without, we don't even necessarily, part of the problem with dissociation, we don't know that it's happening. We're kind of there's a sort of numbness to our experience. And I think, often people who kind of, maybe seek out extreme situations, maybe kind of, again, self-harming.
Even daydreaming. It's a form of...
Well, yeah. Well, nothing wrong with daydreaming. That's fine. But yes, it's I think, it's when dissociation takes us into dangerous places, perhaps. Yeah, and I'm also a meditation teacher, and I know that's again that can be a risk. People kind of go into spiritual practices in order to sort of maintain that sort of state of floatiness, actually, which is I think why a lot of good meditation teachers put a lot of emphasis on embodiment, feeling the feelings. One of my teachers in this field and in the trauma field says, he's done like 30 years of training, and he says, it boils down to, we have to learn to feel the feelings.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's we're doing okay for time. I think let's just take a minute, shall we, just to kind of rest and just experience ourselves for a moment. Just take a breath and maybe just feel into our guts. So see if you can kind of get a sense of the internal weather. So down in our guts. So our gut feelings. Our guts are full of nerve endings, the enteric nervous system, or the gut brain.
1 billion brain cells.
Yeah, and our gut is very kind of sensitive to issues of safety and danger. There's some research actually that I've seen that actually our gut registers danger before our central nervous system. So yes, I'm just going to read a little. So maybe just coming out of our guts now, but because I'm about to read a quote from Van der Kolk, which some people might find a bit activating. So here he says, traumatized people feel chronically unsafe inside their bodies. The past is alive in the form of gnawing inner discomfort. The body's bombarded by visceral warning signs. So yeah, something about that word, gnawing inner discomfort. Yeah. It's,
it is very visceral, isn't it? And it gets you here, right down here.
Yeah, and yeah, that sense of our bodies not being a safe place to be, and how, in a way, that's it's a kind of hell on earth, actually. But and that's obviously why we dissociate, because of the difficult feelings in the body, and why people who are traumatized kind of go to substances to try and resolve the pain. Okay. So yeah, shall we? Let's head towards the good news then, shall we? So resilience. I think like we've already said, resilience requires the prefrontal cortex to be online. Yeah. So a lot of our capacity for resilience is about our capacity to make sensible choices. In a lot of ways, we know what's good for us, but we don't always do it. And often I think that's because our executive function, as we call it, jargon, is not online. Our impulse control is disabled. But yeah, resilience itself, of course, in sort of mechanics or engineering, resilience means the ability of a shape to return to its original shape after it's been pulled or stretched or pressed or bent. Yeah, so forces operating on it, and it can return to its previous state. Which is kind of, that speaks, doesn't it, to sort of plasticity, the neuroplasticity.
The neuroplasticity, yes, that our brains are plastic and adaptable.
Yeah.
It's not whether we're talking about trauma or whether we're talking about an attachment style, secure and insecure, these are not life sentences. What we have learned, we can unlearn or relearn.
Yeah, so, yes, so we can learn resilience. But in order, I think, in order for the for neuroplastic changes to take place, we've got to the neural we've got to get out of that state of neural cement. One of the big learnings around in the trauma field is that requires safety. Yeah, safety is a kind of precondition, a sense of feeling safe. And obviously in your work, a lot of that is around building relationship. Yeah,
building trust. Absolutely, you got to build trust first. It's the first stage in any therapeutic relationship.
Yeah, and in the same with me. You're doing it through maybe through speech, and I'm doing it through touch, but essentially it's the same. But yeah, so in order for us to be resilient and to develop resilience, we have to kind of get the prefrontal cortex back online, and that means clearing the trauma. If we're working with a traumatized nervous system, if we have a traumatized nervous system, then we've got to find a way of clearing the trauma. And again, the key teaching, as I understand it, in that respect, is that healing trauma is about meeting the body. Yeah. So, there's plenty of other things that we can do after that, but the first thing we have to do is to meet the body. And I've got a quotation here from Peter Levine, who's written a famous book called Waking the Tiger that people might have heard of. He says, I believe that the people who are most resilient and find the greatest peace in their lives have learnt to tolerate extreme sensations. So that's, difficult feelings in the body, They've learned to tolerate extreme sensations whilst gaining the capacity for reflective self-awareness. So I think that's kind of neat, because I think that kind of connects our two lines of work in a way, maybe.
It does. I think it's a very good quote to have chosen. And developing a capacity for reflective self-awareness is the bit that I do. That's how I see my focus. Yeah,
and yes, and helping people to develop the capacity to tolerate extreme sensations is mine. Hey, we should go into business together.
Little and large or something.
Men in waistcoats.
Perfect.
So well, I've said it before, but we have to, we've got to learn to feel the feelings, and we talk about that in terms of bottom-up processing first. So, we haven't really talked in any detail actually about the autonomic nervous system, have we? But anyway, the feelings, the internal weather, the feeling states, the vagus nerve, and the sympathetic nervous system. All that is going on inside us in our viscera, and that's kind of that's where our feelings are happening, isn't it? In our inside our torso and our trunk here.
And there's a constant feedback loop.
Yeah.
So it's iteration, reiteration.
Yeah. So there's that interesting bit about the vagus nerve, which is the main sort of parasympathetic nerve, the rest and digest. Vagus means wanderer. 80% of that is wired to go up. Yeah.
It sends information up towards the brain.
Yeah. So the brain is constantly receiving information about what's going on below the neck, and below, the heart in particular, but also the guts. So yes. The other important thing in my work anyway is and I'm sure around in yours as well is the importance of pacing. And Babette Rothschild's got a useful analogy of the Coke bottle.
Yes.
So we say an activated, a traumatized nervous system is like a Coke bottle that's been shaken up, and if you take the top off, it's gonna just spurt out everywhere, and you've got a big job clearing it up, and you've lost a lot of your resources. So the task is, or we probably know, you just release a little at a time, and then tighten again, and then at some point you've released enough pressure for it, you can take the top off. And please don't drink it. Please don't drink the Coke, because it's poison. But anyway, the analogy still holds. We call this is what's called titration. Yeah. So just a little bit at a time, and that's very important. That when we're working with the traumatized nervous system, we just do a little bit at a time, and then come back to safety, come back to resources, and then we go back maybe into the difficult material. So that journey forwards and back, again, we've learned that that's how nervous systems change. Yeah. There was that whole thing in the kind of in the 70s and 80s of kind of catharsis, wasn't there? Of kind of beating the cushions and screaming and yelling and stuff, which was, actually, it works, but it doesn't work for long. We feel better afterwards, but actually the neuroplastic changes don't take place. We've got to do it slowly.
Yeah.
But then once actually the prefrontal cortex is back online, the resilience stuff, in the literature anyway, it's fairly kind of commonsensical, isn't it?
It is. The advice, there's lots of it online, particularly around coronavirus and COVID, and lockdown survival, to take good care of yourself, food, exercise, diet, the usual things, limit your consumption of alcohol, TV, and news. And I think the most important one is is maintaining and nurturing relationships, and that's the attachment bit. That's where I come in particularly, I think, is recognizing the value of other people. There is a lovely quote from Dr. Chris Peterson, the founder of positive psychology, who says, "Other people matter." Mm.
And what does that say to you?
It says that you can, in order to survive stress, you can draw on the resources of other people. I often, in my therapy, I talk about borrowing other people's limbic systems. You borrow somebody else's limbic system to help you cope with the overwhelm in your own. Share it.
Yeah. Well, yes, I said, one of my teachers has said, the most useful thing that we can offer as a therapist is a balanced autonomic nervous system.
Yeah.
And
this is the foundation of the talking cure. This is the foundation of psychology. This is what Freud's method was originally christened as by his first ever patient, the talking cure.
But yeah, there's a kind of there's actually a kind of there's a communication taking place at a sort of a subliminal level. Nervous systems are kind of resonating with each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I think anything else, Martin, you wanted to say? I mean, I guess we've just kind of we have just sort of touched in there on the importance of other people and community. So let's just let's just hear it for community as well. And
absolutely.
Yeah, maybe just at this point, I'd like to just particularly mention the Primrose Hill Community Association Neighbourhood NOSH initiative, which has been set up and has been very effective in supporting people in our neighbourhood who've been struggling in lockdown to even to put food on their plates. So congratulations to them. But maybe if we can at this point bring Steve back up. Can we get Steve here? Remote to panelist. Here he is. Steve, do you want to turn your camera on? Here he is. There's Mr. Steve Carr. And you can unmute yourself.
Here we go, unmuted.
Thank you. So, Steve, any questions that you've that have?
Yeah, a few. We had something from Matthew, who talked about a breathing exercise that they're doing in Primrose Hill Choir on the Mondays. Breathe in 4 counts, out 4 counts, then relax. Release the diaphragm, abdomen, and you'll feel the breath coming in by itself. In for 4, out for 6, and relax. In for 4, out for 8, and relax. The important thing is to monitor that you are staying relaxed all over when doing the exercise, and also relax after each exhalation. So yeah, thank you, Matthew. That sounds great.
Well, yes, I mean, breathing is such it's a kind of biohack. Yeah, we're talking about biohacking. Well, as Martin said right at the beginning, breath control is, what is it? The only one out of 161 autonomic functions that we can consciously control. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, if anyone's done any yoga or meditation, they'll know that the breath, impacts directly into our nervous system. And we talk about, so we mentioned briefly this the vagus nerve, which is the rest, repair, and digest, the relaxation nerve. And we talk about applying the vagal brake. Yeah, so we want to increase our vagal tone. Same thing, increasing vagal tone or applying the vagal brake. Same thing. And the breath is a great way of doing that, particularly the
breath.
exhalation. Yeah.
So we're getting a few more questions. So there's one here. Are we currently in a situation with COVID and lockdown and not knowing when it will end, surrounded by daily news of death, separation, where many people feel like they are exhausting their repertoire of resources?
Yes, I think so. I think there is this lockdown, unlike the first one, is particularly wearing. And some of the resilience techniques, for example, doing something new, being creative. There was lots of talk of people learning a new language or developing cooking skills or taking up new hobbies. In lockdown one, there's not so much talk of that now. There is a state of exhaustion, I think.
Yes, we've yes, because all that kind of learning new stuff, neuro novelty. Is it? Are you sounding strange there? No, it's okay. It's gone again. Neuro novelty. Yeah, and we seem to run out of our ability to do that, don't we?
Okay, there's a couple more. All men on screen. Are there gender differences in how stress trauma is handled between genders, men and women, I suppose?
Well, yes, and the other genders as well.
Of course.
Yes, I did. I was going to say actually at the beginning, I'm aware that we're an all male panel. Martin, I think, what was it? Male, pale, and stale.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, actually, I'm please, if there are any women watching or who've got a kind of therapeutic background and would like to do a presentation, we'd be very interested to hear from them. Well, but differences. Gosh, well, this is interesting territory, isn't it? When we start to
there are, and I haven't. If I'd anticipated this question, I would have checked. There are some. I think there are some differences in percentages in the way that people respond to stress, but they're not at my fingertips, I'm afraid.
Yeah. So but so much of that is around. Is gender a social construction anyway? But yes, is around kind of societal expectations as well, isn't it?
So we might need to do a bit of homework on that one.
I might have homework on that.
Okay, so another one here then. What do you think of emotional freedom technique, tapping on acupuncture points as a way of dealing with stress, EFT?
Well, I don't know if you've come across EFT, Martin.
Yeah, and tapping. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my understanding, it works, but we don't really know why. Well, if acupuncture and the meridians is something that you're going to kind of make sense or part of your worldview, then then you do know why. But and also people might have come across another acronym, EMDR, which is an effective way of working with trauma, where you get the eyes to move from side to side. Shapiro's work. Again, we don't really understand why it works, but it does. It's probably worth saying that our understanding of how the brain works is still fairly rudimentary. I mean, we've learned a lot, as Martin said, in the last 30 years, but
yeah,
still a lot that we don't.
Okay. I'm just moving on quickly because there's a few more here. So can we unlearn deeply held trauma? So we talked about this trauma with a little t. Do we move away from that entirely or learn to cope with? What's the...
Yeah, yes is the short answer, and that's the gift of neuroplasticity that we've mentioned a couple of times now. I liken it to an accent. So if you grow up in Scotland, you're probably going to have an accent for the rest of your life, but you can learn to speak received pronunciation. And so you can learn a new way of responding and reacting and being in the world. But that echo will always be there. And part of the self-awareness that I try and teach people is to recognize when it's happening, so that gives you a moment of choice. Is that, yes, your instinct is to react in the same old way, same old. If you do keep doing the same old things, you get the same results. So if you can recognize the moment when you're triggered as a result of stress, and you want to act in that automatic reaction, your usual response, if you can pause at that moment, even for a second, it gives you an opportunity to choose. And the more you practice it, the more resilient you become. You're also growing new neural pathways. That's the neuroplasticity. You are literally growing new neural pathways all the time. And there's another lovely phrase, that neurons that fire together wire together. So what starts off as a soft connection becomes a hardwired connection over time.
So you still may get triggered, but it's your response to it that can shift.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So another question here. Is there an age limit on neuroplasticity?
There isn't. There is a, no, literally. So that's why you can learn new skills. At any age, you can learn a new skill, and you're having to store that information in your brain, whether that be something like taking up golf in retirement, or whether that's learning a new learning something cognitive, a thinking skill using Sudoku puzzles and what have you, learning how to do that, or crosswords to keep your brain check, if your brain nimble if you've got dementia. So there's definitely, but of course, the younger you are, the more malleable, the more plastic you are. So there's a sliding scale.
So I'm supposing from that, it doesn't matter, you may have had a trauma at some point in your life and thought, well, I'll never get over that, and only come to it later on in your life and still be able to kind of move through it.
Yes, you can. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm thinking there's someone who came to our Buddhist center in her 80s with, still, well, I think probably only just starting to really appreciate the depth of the trauma that she had experienced, and actually her family as well. It was kind of what you might even call sort of ancestral trauma. She is, 5 years later, a different person.
One of my first clients was a 75-year-old former actress who was dealing with a memory of sexual abuse from when she was 18.
Thank you. So there's another one here, which is, can you just say more about the feeling the feelings? Well, that seemed, this is my thing, that seemed a bit vague. What do you actually mean by that? Like, healing comes through feeling the feelings. How might I go about that? What is that?
So this is the whole area of what we call learning to self-regulation. So when we talk about feeling the feelings, we're talking about slowly and carefully and with a degree of self-compassion, just allowing ourselves to come into relationship with sensations in the body. So remembering that kind of Bessel's sort of description of the gnawing feelings, the visceral warning signs.
In relationship with a therapist, with someone else? Is it work that one can do on one's own?
Yes, no, absolutely it is. If you can, so I call it the internal weather system, is to focus on what is going on inside, try and understand it, try and identify it. There's another lovely phrase, I like these phrases, name it to tame it. If you can identify an emotion and accurately name it, it gives you a sense of power over it. It no longer feels like that the dog is wagging the tail. Sorry, it no longer feels like the tail is wagging the dog.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, I think naming it is one thing. There's an interesting practice about in Buddhism, naming one's demons. But I think also just actually allowing or feeling the sense, the feeling sensation. I mean, feelings is an interesting word, isn't it? Because it's kind of, we've got sensations, yeah, and then we've got emotions, and feeling tends to kind of be a synonym for both of those. But actually, I would suggest there's a difference there. It's feeling sensations that are the kind of precursor to our emotional states. I mean, like we described, the vagus is sending messages to the brain, and it's the information it's sending is about feeling sensations. So maybe a feeling sensation is my guts are feeling relaxed, and digestion's going on and everything's groovy, or my guts have gone into contraction, and there's a lot of fear down here. So these are the feelings that when we say we need to learn to feel the feelings, this is it, the visceral sensation that we spend a lot of time running away from.
Thank you. I suppose one imagines feeling some of the sadness that comes with these feelings too, and expressing that, allowing that to be coming. That's kind of what I also understand by what you're saying.
Yeah, we talk about touch. Sorry, am I interrupting?
Yeah, that's fine.
Well, we talk about touch, physical touch, but we also talk about being touched. I'm touched by that. And I think for me, you can do this on your own, but very often it's the practice is learned in therapy with a therapist, because it's then witnessed, it's then validated.
Yes.
Somebody helps interpret what's going on for you. You name it together, and then you think, oh, somebody's seen it. I've been seen. How important is that?
Yeah. And Sophie's jumping in here saying, feel it to heal it. That sounds...
Feel it to heal it. Exactly,
exactly right. Another thing from Ulrika, something I've got an interest in, so thank you, Ulrika. She says, my worry is that although schools start to pick up on children with trauma dissociation disorder, and some schools offer a 1 or 2 day training course to raise awareness, do you possibly know as to why just now, due to COVID, the alarm goes off when mental health should have been dealt with in schools much sooner? So it feels like she's asking about the place of mental health in schools there, particularly.
Well, I think
raised right now.
Steve, you're probably better placed to answer that since you're you teach teachers, don't you, to deal with emotions in the classroom?
Yes, and one of the things I teach teachers to deal with emotions in the classroom. I was nearly 20 years a teacher, and Ulrika absolutely believed that mental health should be part of teacher training, not as a sort of an add-on or an adjunct, but a notion that they really understand not only the children's mental health, but actually their own kind of place in the kind of mental lives of the children that they're teaching. Something along the lines of the Bowlby thing for me is about understanding that actually the teacher forms almost a parental relationship with the children in the room. And it's very important that they understand the place that they have in those children's lives. And at the same time, they have a real clear picture that actually there is some, not quite parental responsibility, but it's the same relationship. Rather than keeping mental health at a distance as an add-on, it's not really mental health, which feels like everyone is ill. It's kind of mental fitness. What fits us for the work that we are doing in that room with those children? I've long appealed for that and written about it and talked about it for a long time. So let's hope that actually COVID means that this will be brought much more into the way we straightforwardly deal with one another and with children in schools. Absolutely.
Yeah. Is there some schools teach kids, it's not something that I do, but I'm aware that some schools teach kids skills for coping with exam stress. And I wonder whether that's something that's transferable in the time of COVID and all this.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of work with teaching kids to deal with stress. And yet this relationship between teacher and pupil, it's also felt as though the teacher is already a grown-up and doesn't bring with them their own kind of set of concerns about the way they make relationships too. So I may have dragged that towards my own agenda there a little bit, but
I'm glad you did.
Well, actually, but it's also it's supporting children's capacity to learn as well, isn't it? Because that's, I mean, I think you make this nice point that actually, children are hungry to learn, but if the emotional landscape of the classroom isn't right, then that's not going to happen.
Yeah. Well, if they go into defensive mode, if they don't feel safe in the room, the teacher doesn't feel safe, the children doesn't feel safe, everybody is in defense mode. And the classic thing would be to just help everyone feel safe. What does that mean? A little bit of training in that regard would be a very straightforward thing to provide. Yes, we've got something from Doro Madden. I wonder if Doro is Dorothy. She sent us a webpage, partnershipsforchildren.org, for great programs run all over the world on coping skills for primary age kids. Yeah, thank you.
So it might just be worth saying to people, actually, obviously the chat disappears at the end of this. So if there are any links in the chat that you want to save, do so before we end. Any other questions for us, Steve?
Not currently. No, just a suggestion again from Doro that actually doing something on parenting in the future on this platform might be a good thing to do.
Okay, so I'd invite any comments into the chat, any suggestions or other events of this kind, or I think my email address, I think Steve's also in the chat, yeah? events@phca.cc. So
it's at the top there.
Yeah, send me an email. And maybe could you just pop the donations link in again for me, Steve? So we do invite donations to the Community Association. Our income has been hit by COVID, as I'm sure yours has. So if you can spare anything, please do so. Just a reminder, there is our resources page that Martin and I put together with this. So a lot of our favorite authors and some interesting web pages, and also some emergency contact numbers. Martin, anything else you'd like to add?
One of the links in the resources page is to a YouTube video, a short YouTube video by somebody called Dr. Lucy Horn, who runs the New Zealand Institute of Resilience. And there's a lovely suggestion that she makes, and this is in reply to an earlier question about lockdown and people tiring in lockdown. I don't think I gave that question justice. Whatever you're doing in response to the feelings of frustration that you might be feeling, anybody in lockdown, the simple question is to ask, is this helping me or is this harming me? Is this making the situation better or worse? And if the answer is, whatever the answer is, it'll guide your next move.
Okay,
well, thank you very much, Steve.
You're really welcome. It was really good. Thank you very much. Really enjoyed. Really enjoyed hearing you. Thank you.
I'm sorry if it took you away from the Coventry game, but
yeah, there's always the second half.
There's always, yeah. That's almost
maybe like, that's a metaphor for something. I'm not.
That is a metaphor. Yeah. So I'm just going to read the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross again, just because it's so lovely, and it kind of speaks to the possibilities. So, the most beautiful people we have known are those who have known defeat, known suffering, known struggle, known loss, and have found their way out of the depths. Those persons have an appreciation, a sensitivity, and an understanding of life that fills them with compassion, gentleness, and a deep, loving concern. Beautiful people do not just happen. So thank you, beautiful people, for coming along. Thank you, Martin. And we'll take another walk. We might even do this again in some form or other. But Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you everyone else for coming along. And our next presentation is green investment. So we're going to be getting some experts in that field at the beginning of March. So watch out for that. But otherwise, good night, everyone. Thanks
Good night.
for joining us.
Good night.